Morning, everyone. Thank you to all of you for being here. Welcome to day 2 of the Power Talks Johannesburg program. I'm incredibly overwhelmed by the number of people that are here. This is incredibly special. And thank you all for coming out, for making time in your weekdays, in your work days. And we're going to talk a lot about making time, finding time, buying time in our work days or in relation to our work as part of this conversation. For those of you who don't know me, but I think most of you here do, I am Naadira Patel. I work independently as a designer. I run a design studio called Softwork, which is part of the methodology of thinking about relationships to work and time. Okay, so some of you might know this, some of you might not, but I come here today feeling slightly exhausted because the past 36 hours have been a little bit of a roller coaster trying to open the program. In the past 36 hours, we deinstalled and reinstalled our entire exhibition, which was the opening of our program. We had to move the exhibition at the last minute due to a range of infrastructural, political forms of exhaustion that resulted in the understanding that there would be not just no lights, no power, not enough infrastructure for us to actually host people. And so we made a decision on Tuesday evening at 6 p.m. to move the exhibition. And by Wednesday evening, 6 p.m., we opened it at the Point of Order in Braamfontein. And that's a 24-hour process, and it's one that I'm incredibly proud of. It's a huge feat that doesn't happen alone. It happens very much with the forces and the energies of all the people who were willing to say, yes, it's cool, we can do this, and it will all work out. And so again, I come here, I did some of that thanking last night at the opening, but I come here again this morning, and I want to say again thank you to all of the people who were part of that process, because it allowed for us to actually continue to open the program as we had planned it, to not have to reschedule anything and to not lose the framing of the exhibition as the opening moment of this program. And a very important one was that I forgot to thank my partner Zen. Part of that forgetting, I suppose, was very much around how we sometimes forget about the energies that are so intimately connected to us. I'm getting slightly emotional. We forget to thank the people who are deeply connected to us because we assume they're just there. Oh, sorry. I didn't want to start this way. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you to everyone who made that possible. It's a big deal. It's a big deal to be here. I'll take a second to recover. Wow, just listening to that again makes me quite emotional. So I guess I'll start off emotionally again.
Yeah, which is maybe the best way to start. What a way to introduce yourself to a new audience with such candor and vulnerability. You're so forthcoming.
Thanks, Kimoa. I mean, it makes me quite emotional thinking back to that moment and thinking about where we are now in putting these episodes together and crafting a season of reflections, of conversations around love and work. So here we are. We're in season 2 of Our We Are Work, and today we're opening with a conversation on exhaustion.
A fitting one, I think. In many ways, we do become our work. It consumes us, overwhelms us. We keep moving somehow.
So what is Our We Are Work?
So Our We Are Work is a fascinating, dynamic, ever-changing research project that really explores and tangles with our identity and relationship to work. Yeah, we are your co-hosts. I am Kimu Busielo, and my wonderful co-host is...
I'm Naadira Patel.
And we have the distinct privilege of guiding you through this season 2 of Our We Are Work.
And just for our listeners, what you heard and what you will continue to hear in this episode is the recording of a live conversation that was held at Lapa in Brixton in September of 2022. It's a conversation between myself, Tiffany Ebrahim, Dee Marco, and Tammy Langtry. It's quite an enriching, life-giving, and vulnerable conversation. I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, I left that conversation feeling much richer than I entered it. So I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so how do we get here to a talk on exhaustion? We're here today at Lapa to speak about exhaustion in the context of the Power Talks program, and to think about ourselves in relation to the work that we do, the work that we love, and to think about what forms of exhaustion are produced from trying again, failing, trying again, and constantly renegotiating ourselves in relation to the people we work with, the institutions we work with, the organizations we work with, and how we think about whether we work with or for or against or inside or outside of. And I am personally very curious about this, how people get stuff done. How do you make it work? Before I hand over, I want to read one thing. It's a list that I've been building for a little while, and I sometimes show it in a presentation, and sometimes I just read it. And it's some notes on work. There's work, and then there's work. And then there's working and making things work, but also working it out, constantly working it out, working out how to make things work. There's the work, and there's the work. And then there's the other work, the job work, the money work, the work that I do because I want to do other work. And all the other work in between that's not quite labeled as work, but technically is, that goes unnoticed, that becomes invisible. I feel like I'm working all the time. Sometimes I feel like I'm working none of the time. But I know that I'm constantly working on making it work, working it out so that I can make work better, in order to make new work, in order to rethink why we work. So with that, I'm going to hand over. I'm going to introduce you to my wonderful panelists who've been so patient to wait for me to run through all of this. Today we have with us Tiffany Ebrahim, we have Dee Marco, and we have Tammy Langtry, all of whom are beautiful people who I've been in conversation with for years. With Tiffany, it started a couple of years ago in relation to the podcast that Tiffany will speak about, Are We Our Work, and thinking about these connections or disconnections between us, our identities, and the work that we do, so love and labor in many ways. With Dee, it's a long time, 10-year or more friendship that sort of like came and went in waves, and in the past few years, we really started to pick up conversations around, again, love and labor, love and mothering and labor, or the fear of mothering from my end, the extreme fears of these things. And then Tammy is someone I know from varsity, and I've been watching the way that Tammy's been working with institutions, working outside of institutions, working independently with a curatorial practice. Our conversations have really picked up in the past year around the work that we do, how we make decisions about what we no longer want to do, and how we constantly pivot and renegotiate to find the thing that is more aligned with who we are and what we want. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to hand over to the panelists, and then we will let the conversation flow. Dee?
Cool. Okay. Hi, everyone. Should I say a little about how we'll go? I think, we're each going to kind of share something about how we're bringing exhaustion to the table, and then we'll have a bit of a conversation about that. I'll start. As I was thinking about what do I bring in this conversation about exhaustion, because there are so many things we could talk about. There are a few intersecting ideas, and I kind of wanted to pull it all together, and so thought that the three things I'd bring here today fall under exhaustion, making people, making me. I must admit, I was a little bit overwhelmed by how many ways this could go, and then realized that I am writing. I'm actually producing something that I'm wanting to take very seriously, and the first part of this book is called Tao, and Tao is my son's name, my eldest son. And it's about pregnancy and matrescence and a period of gestation, a period of making, but also a deeply exhausting period in your life. And thinking about how exhaustion fashions in my life, that it's something that doesn't actually go away. And what's interesting is that we all pick up on that, which you'll hear later. It's not something, exhaustion doesn't, it's not gone. It's a constant state. So I'm just going to read. I'm going to read from this in progress work. Yeah. It's the summer of 2015. It's warm. I finally see my legs. I've also finally found my groove here in the UK, and I'm quite smitten with myself. When I first find out I'm pregnant, I'm between post-gym glow and pre-writing flow. I'm in a good space. It's consistent. My routine is unflappable. I'm working very, very hard. I wake up early. I relish in the flow of good coffee, good breakfast. I inhale deeply. I know where I am on the page. I can hear the last words that went onto the screen. Clack, clack, clack from my own fingers against the plonking and punching on similar keyboards all around me. The same energy in the small postgraduate room. Every day the same thing, barring the sperm donors' late-night breakdowns and yearnings for home. They come in the form of 2 or 3 a.m. entries back into this small flat on the border of Shoreditch and Hackney. This little council flat, in many ways the hipster dream is his nightmare. It's close to the river, there's an organic market, there's a bus stop. It's everything you could hope for. I'm living the dream. Yoga studios galore. It's a far cry from the small English town I landed in when I first got here. I also like being alone now, but I'm no longer alone. I'll soon find out, as I rather absent-mindedly chuck in 1, maybe 2 tests before paying at the local Boots in the Old Street tube station. Intimacy faded fast between us, and I can't quite figure out how or why I'd be pregnant. But as I climb over the bath to get into the warm, comforting shower, I see the 2 prominent lines on the strip. Like the flat, the bathroom is tiny. I'm in the shower, but I'm also looking at the stick. It's right there. I can touch it, but I don't want to. I'm terrified I'll contaminate it. In shock, proximity doesn't matter. I hop out, I double-check the box. He's inside. He's still recovering from a long night. I hear the snoring. I notice I already feel sorry for the kid. Shit. Where's the second box? I will myself to pee again. I can't. As I stand in the shower, my body betrays me and lets loose wee again. I feel the extra warmth slinking down my thighs and I touch it, as though I can tell the pee from the water. A distinguishable warmth, I convince myself. Baby's pee, I decide immediately. I dress, grab my phone, run down the 3 flights of stairs from the grey corner flat with the red door. The number 55 bus is approaching and I make it. I make it in time. I tap the oyster, I shimmy along, I find my seat upstairs. A true commoner kind of thing to do. Prove that you won't fall down the narrow staircase as the bus pulls away. This is the best part of my day, sitting by the big window, watching the sights go by. I'm glad now that I did not end up in central London from the beginning. Too expensive, I tell myself. Yet I do so love flitting around the town. The small but distinct achievement of being able to navigate a city by foot, by underground, by bus, by myself. Knowing all these things, knowing the times, knowing the distinct way one performs one's being part of versus standing out. The truly exceptional thing about this being a PhD student experience is that despite your state of not having much, you have got time. Time that age mates are starting to see drift into the oblivion of adulthood. Chores, bills, children, responsibility, boring. It's a gestational time of its own. Now, on this new day, with the baby pee in my body, I sit with pregnancy, with my books, a computer, and a fetus. I sit like this for days and weeks before I say anything. The breaks are no longer punctuated with a tobacco rollie that I hold out for hours, but instead overpriced organic chocolate cake slices, gourmet chips with truffle sauce, a Caesar salad I'm yet to match. The baby liked nice things. This chapter is about my first pregnancy and my matrescence and the complex relationship between making people and making me in an exhausted and exhausting time of life. It could be an entire book, like the baby books. Trimester 1, they write. You may feel very tired, rest often, they advise. Then the baby is the size of a fig. Trimester 2, they write, you will have energy again. The baby is the size of a... Trimester 3, they write, you may have an urge to nest. They write, the baby is the size of a watermelon. What the fuck? You're very tired. Rest. Prepare for meeting your bundle of joy. I'm disgusted. I'll end there for now.
Thank you, Dee. That's lovely. Earlier we were talking and kind of trying to map out all the conversations we'd had to land this conversation. And one of my points was, how do we make the space soft? And so thank you. That was, fun and funny and poignant. I am, I think, invited in a way of thinking in relation to working with organizations and institutions. But I partly don't want to use those two words and rather use the word organizing. So how do we organize ourselves? And that's partly not coming from a fine art, visual art background or a family that works in these ways or interacts with the world in those ways, but more from political or cultural organizing. And I think that's been interesting because when you do enter the art working world, you kind of encounter failure. Part of what I wanted to offer was this idea that exhaustion often comes with a sense of diagnosing, wanting to diagnose what is making me exhausted. And so from that exhaustion, is there a sense of failure? Is there a sense of disappointment? Is there a sense of rebirth? Exhaustion not as always an ending, but the next phase of something. Because exhaustion never ends. These things that we have to deal with, negotiate. And so I think partly working in several different ways of organizing, institutions, organizations, was about a sense of diagnosing, sense of figuring out what is not working here. And my recent 2 questions for myself is, 1, how do I create a sense of value, not just for my own work and myself, but for those that I encounter and work with and make sense of? So my kind of phase I'm in now, and this was maybe the thing that struck Naadira to include me, was this question of buying back one's time. Is that possible? Is that necessary? Especially when we think of our work as either altruistic or passion or purpose-driven. How does one think about our time in relation to that? And my big challenge and question, and we kind of spoke about this, is that there's technically a 5th panelist here, which is the city of Johannesburg. So when we talk about our work, we also have that banner hanging over this. How is our work being negotiated in a city like Johannesburg? Is Johannesburg exhausted? And I think about what happened last night and the kind of things that we deal with in building infrastructure within an art space. Is the city exhausted? That's another thing I'm just throwing on the table, and I think will become part of our conversation. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so my project is called Are We Our Work? And it's a research project exploring the intersections of identity, labor, and fulfillment. And work specifically is interpreted very broadly. It works from the premise that everybody is working all the time, whether you're formally employed or not. And so it's a cross-sector analysis where I interview a range of people from a range of sectors on their experiences in relation to their careers. And the title, Are We Our Work, is basically playing with 3 broad categories that I tend to find people fall into. The one is, I do what I love for a living. The other, which is on the opposite end of the spectrum, is I deliberately divorce what I love from what I do to make money. And then there's sometimes the 3rd category of person that I speak to, which is I do both. Whether that's I have a 9 to 5 and I run a passion project that isn't expected to make me money, but is expected to bring me joy. Or whether it's I'm a working parent and I see my parenting as much as effort and determination and validation and exhaustion as I associate with work. And so it's blurring a lot of the lines between the ways that we talk about labor and the ways that we talk about ourselves. How clear are the lines between the internal and the personal via the external and the public? How do we understand our dreams and our aspirations in relation to our prisons and our oppressions? And to what extent is it necessary to think about our work as vocations, as sites of passion and love and imagination, but also as practical sites of financial production? Where do the purities lie? Do we have to always think about our work in terms of the money we make? Or are there other sites of value that keep your body, your infrastructure, you as an infrastructure alive emotionally? And so it's exploring all of those themes. And season 1 of the anthology podcast series interviewed 13 people. And from those 13 interviews are some observations that I would like to share with you today on the theme of exhaustion. And maybe I should start off with the disclaimer that exhaustion was actually spoken about positively overall. The first thing that came out was understanding that people made quite a clear distinction between saying I'm tired versus saying I'm exhausted. And to say I'm tired often meant that people were still accepting that they wanted to continue their participation in the game, but change their position in relation to how they play the game, whether that's cheating the system or playing out their behavior in passive-aggressive ways or subversive ways. There was a almost renegotiation of role and script when people would say, I'm tired, but I'm still working. Whereas exhaustion was a point of break. It was a mobility, a transition. It was not, which is what I thought it would have been, it was not spoken about as a deeper sinking into limbo. It wasn't considered to be a deeper level of passivity or nothingness. It was, if anything, action, proactive. I did something. I made a decision because of exhaustion. That's the one thing I wanted to draw out, is that tired and exhaustion were actually not synonymously spoken about, and exhaustion was not spoken about as inaction. It was spoken about as a site of agency and proactive behavior. The other thing that came up in the subject of exhaustion was that when participants said they felt exhausted, what that feeling did for them was also fundamentally reshape their relationship with time. And whether this came in the form of claiming ownership of time and saying, I want my time back, I'm going to take my time back, or falling out of sync with the construction of temporality by their authority. So the working of 9 to 5, the 1 hour lunch break, the overtime, rejecting that and divorcing from that and saying, I am no longer going to conflate my sense of time with my boss's sense of time. I'm going to renegotiate how I think about it and how I experience it. And in that, in people, and this is interesting because Tammy mentioned that exhaustion also comes with diagnosis, often self-diagnosis. How am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? How did I get here? In having those sorts of conversations with the interview participants, 2 main frameworks came out in how they self-diagnosed. The one was an exploration of mental health discussions, anxiety, bipolar, depression, schizophrenia. And then the other was more a framework of addiction. My behavior is playing itself out in the way that it is, in the same way that I understand addiction. And that was, interesting. Sorry, I heard the word interesting, and I felt the same way. Because I do think that our study of ourselves and our work is a study of ourselves and our behavior patterns. And maybe there's something to take from an addiction framework or lens. And I like it because it thinks about addiction in more tender ways, against the dominant discourse of looking down on addicts. It's making it tender, but it's also, for me, allowing the conversation to not stay on substance when we think about addiction. It is more inclusive. And so, what was a big takeaway from the participants on the subject of exhaustion was it became conversations not about how do you prevent exhaustion, how do you avoid it, how do you evade it, how do you stop it. It was how do you make peace with it? because it is coming and it will keep coming. And those moments in which it comes, it's an opportunity to change direction, to actively make decisions and do something, even if that decision is, I want to do less. It was sites of divorce, of resignation, of shutting down that also opened up rebirth, reconfiguration. Exhaustion is the thing that they're thankful for, because how else could they have gotten to that point of honesty?
Thank you, all of you. That was special, feels like a useless word in this situation. This was on another level. I think this idea of exhaustion that you speak about, Tiffany, as like the moment of, well, you speak about it, Tammy speaks about it, I think you all speak about it in a different way. Exhaustion as the moment that you make a decision. That is an incredibly productive moment, even if we want to think about critiquing the idea of what is productive. But there's an incredibly productive energy that comes from being at that point of feeling completely exhausted, that you go, something's got to give, something's got to change. This is where it happens now. And so I wanted to ask any one of you here, what are those moments for you in the ways that you've been working, in the work that you've chosen to do or leave or continue to stay within?
I love how everyone turned to me. As you were reflecting that, I was just thinking to myself, I particularly work in a precarious context. If I talk about art generally, it's an unstable, precarious context. So if I think about the kinds of infrastructure you're maybe thinking to that have stability or have a sense of a monthly paycheck or a HR, which you get to negotiate terms with, we don't have that. I don't have that. I am my own HR. So that kind of instability comes with the terrain, comes with making decisions, it comes with pivoting, it comes with reading the room and the context and what can be done and made out of what's in front of you.
I find those moments traumatic. I know which moments you're talking about, and then I start shaking because I'm like, oh, it was fear. It was feeling like you're giving up, but you're also knowing that you're giving in, and to give in, you need to give up. But is it practical? Shit, I'm going to lose an income. And then it's also formal. Well, at least from my former workplace, you write out a letter very formally stating, I am leaving this organization. You sort of say something nice in between, but it's ultimately goodbye. But I'm still going to work here for the next 30 days because policy says that I need to submit this within a month's notice. So now it's awkward. We're divorced, but we're still living in the same house. We're watering the plants. We're saying morning to each other at coffee. And the day sort of, that final month takes forever. And then there's the celebration of you leaving. You know, there's like a little farewell. Then it's quite formal, but also awkward because it's on a Friday night and you actually want your time at home because you want a Netflix. So I think maybe the point I'm making is that it's a series of like rituals, formal exits. And it's as complicated getting out of it as it is getting into it. If I reverse that, it started off with an application, an interview, a second interview, an induction, a contract. What's that thing called? Probation. After probation, then the real contract comes. And I was surprised by how contractual and how layered leaving is as entering was.
Before I open up to questions, I wanted to speak a bit about this idea of buying your time, which is something that I still never managed to do because I just keep taking on more projects to supposedly buy time in the future. So I want to know how it is you think about, Tammy, you're the one who speaks about buying time, so I want you to respond to that if you're open to it, and then Tiffany and Dee as well, because I think we all do this in some way.
Sure. I mean, the idea of buying back my time came from a knee-jerk reaction to working in an institution where you're constantly, I called it being a Victorinox, where you're constantly pulling out a different tool to figure out how to fix something else, to make the next thing. So as I said, it was kind of a knee-jerk reaction to that. and to wanting to retool, re-understand how I work and how I associate myself to work, connect myself to work. So I do work across different projects, different styles of working, different scales of working, different levels of intimacy and professionalism. And in that, it's about how do I scaffold myself and those around me. I'm speaking a bit abstract here, but I hope it makes sense. And that doesn't have one answer or one kind of like, I'm buying my time for this. Some of those are material things. Some of those are emotional things. Some of those are spiritual things. But it was about renegotiating what time meant for me and what my outputs meant and looked like. And how do those I work with value those things? And how do I value them? And is there a meeting in that partnership?
My answer's, I think, brief. Buying back my time is still it's a huge negotiation, but essentially it's about trying to buy time to work. Yeah, just every day trying to figure out how to do that. Because there's institutional work and labor and ways in which one needs to perform for that kind of space and the kind of formalized strata of one's life in relationship to employment, which is also, of course, about a relationship to income. Pushing your paycheck or whatever it is as far as you can go, that's like one part of it. And then, of course, there are all these other less not informal, but less formalized ways of working, if that is something one desires to do. Being able to work on this book, there's no time in the day to work on the book. Working on the book means not sleeping. Look at that, you know? Okay.
I felt like I haven't really bought time because I resigned and then I've gone back to being a student, which also meant letting go of my independent life and my own apartment and moving back in with my mom and my brother and the dogs. So in many ways, I feel like I've downgraded, if I'm honest. And I buy less because I don't have much money. I've also lost my relationship with time. Because being a student is so flexible, you can sometimes do nothing on a day and sometimes do so much on a day and feel like such a slave to a deadline. Time has humbled me, and I think my ego needed it. And I say that because I think our egos develop in our workplaces. And it's been so good for me to step back and to diffuse my ego. And that I never want to let go of.
Asma, and then I saw one more hand, Jill, and Danai, and then I have to take you all outside for lunch.
To me, that was really empowering, and also to then question productivity, the performance of productivity, and everything that comes with it, because that kind of exhaustion is also about the labor. So to kind of be in peace with those two sides of exhaustion, I think, is maybe a life task. But now to come to my question is like, can you also see the positivity in exhaustion, especially as art practitioners? Yeah.
Hi, I wanted to ask if you could all speak about the perceived spectrum of exhaustion and the transmission of exhaustion, because listening to your fascinating conversation made me think about pain and how the medical world has been obsessed with coming up with taxonomies of pain. You know, when you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you, on a scale from 1 to 10, how sore are you? And you're like, what the fuck? I'm in pain. You want to say 10, but you feel bad because you're like, surely someone is in more pain than me. So you say 6.5, maybe? Then hearing you talk, it made me think of, how some people are exhausted because they had to take on so much, maybe a parent's emotional labor because that parent was exhausted. And then I also think of other people who are exhausted because they had to do care work from one day because their partner or the domestic worker couldn't do it that day. And they're both exhausted. And you want to acknowledge that exhaustion, but there's a difference in that exhaustion. So I wanted to hear you speak about that.
Okay, mine is more a comment. And there's so many things that have happened. It began, Dee, when you talked about, the pee on the thigh. There's something in the fleshiness of the body that makes it so unneat, including our attachments to the things that allow us to gain access to a life that's different or better than the ones we've known, and almost distancing from the body. In fact, most of actually when people feel like they're losing their mind in terms of work has been, I'm not in my body anymore. And that's really, really painful, I think.
Would you like to respond to anything that's come in before we close?
Yeah, I think there've just been such really interesting comments and questions. Danai, I think what you're saying is like feeling in your body. Like feeling in my body is a hard thing for me. It's safer for me to think with my brain, and my brain actually doesn't really let me down. So it's a safer place for me to be. But the fact that the mere fact that you're even bringing this here forces me into a very different place, like a kind of body sitting place. Thank you for that. Asma, yeah, I think that kind of push and pull it's so central to this conversation about exhaustion. But I'm also very aware that like we come at exhaustion kind of from where we're at, which also feeds into what I'd want to say to you, Gilles, which is interesting you're using this measure of pain, because my partner's hurt his ankle, and I could tell that he was like getting really pissed at me because I was unable to be truly empathetic. But I'm unable to be empathetic partly because my answer to Danai, which is it's hard for me to feel feelings all the time, but it's also hard for me to understand someone else's physical pain. The everyday pushback on that comes from the kids. I've knocked myself, I've hurt myself, and you realize how quick you are to determine their pain for them. No, you haven't. You don't need a plaster. You haven't actually hurt yourself. So to even begin to think of that as a taxonomy at all, I think also depends on where you're at. Where you're at in your own kind of processes and relationship to labor. And yeah, I'm answering you both in the same way, because I think that there's a contradiction that is present in the answer to both, which is I recognize the contradiction you're speaking about and how that also registers on your body, how that becomes visible, and how other people read you as exhausted or exhausted enough. How do you validate your exhaustion? For me, there's an intersection and, of course, a contradiction.
I just want to tag on the contradiction thing in answer to your question about transmissions of exhaustion. It's a bit of a twisted answer, but when you're working and you're exhausted, then you know you're really working. And that's weirdly often sites of solidarity building, closeness, bond, connection. We need to make it through this really difficult patch, and we need to survive, and we can only do it together. And then that does all kinds of things for what the workplace becomes. But the point that I'm making is that sometimes it's via exhaustion that as human beings we're forced to learn how to communicate and work with each other and with one another towards something in ways that words can't give us. It's not a verbal language, and maybe there's a beauty in that. You're learning how to respond with your body and with your heart and your mind without always speaking. And there's something that I think I appreciate about that.
I'm going to wrap up the conversation there. I want to give a huge, huge thank you. I'm very humbled by all of you saying yes. Thank you for being part of this conversation. Thank you for sharing, for being vulnerable, for opening up your worlds. Thank you to everyone who's been here to listen in on the conversation, but really a massive thank you to our panelists here today.
All right, that was the kickoff of season 2. I think it is a great genesis of how this season unfolds. Yeah, I really love that episode.
Yeah, thanks, Kimo. Yeah, it's a really special moment.
Okay, Are We Our Work? It is an independent research project and podcast anthology series centered around questions of love, fulfillment, relationships, identities, and work. Co-hosted by Naadira Patel and myself, Kimumbu Cielo. This episode was produced and edited by Tiffany Ebrahim. Sound design by Joao Orekia. Music by Vuma Levine. Illustration by Softwork Studio. And web design by Sky Quadlin. To stay up to date with the project and how it continues to evolve, check out @OurWeOurWork on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening.